All right, let's dive into another deep dive. And today, we're going to be tackling Canada's economic performance.
Ooh, big topic.
Yeah, it's a big one, and we're going to be looking specifically over the past 3 decades.
Okay.
And to help us unpack this, we're going to be looking at a conversation between Jordan Peterson and Jim Balsillie.
Okay.
And Jim Balsillie, of course, is the former co-CEO of BlackBerry. So
Right.
quite an interesting perspective when it comes to the Canadian economy.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that makes this conversation so compelling is, he's not just a successful entrepreneur.
Right.
He's really deeply steeped in this world of, global economics and intellectual property and so on.
Yeah, he really understands the forces that
Yeah.
shape the economy. And, one of the things that he really emphasizes is that Canada has been lagging behind.
Yeah.
And he attributes this to a fundamental shift in the global economy that we haven't really adapted to.
And he paints a pretty stark picture, actually.
Yeah.
He points out that Canada's GDP per capita,
Right.
which is essentially a measure of our economic output per person,
Per person.
is currently sitting at 60% of what the U.S. produces.
Oh, wow.
And projections actually have that,
Sure.
falling even further behind.
That's a pretty alarming statistic.
Yeah.
So what does he attribute this decline to?
Well, he says it all comes down to this rise of what he calls the intangibles economy.
Okay.
So this is a shift away from, kind of the traditional production-based economy
Right.
where we were, focused on manufacturing physical goods.
Yeah.
Now he says the real value lies in things like, software,
Right.
data, artificial intelligence, these intangible assets.
Right. And the world has definitely changed, since the days when we were thriving on, resource extraction and manufacturing.
Exactly. And that's really what Balsillie argues is that we made a critical error
Right.
back in the early 90s
Okay.
that has kind of put us on this path to decline.
So what was that error?
Well, he points specifically to 1994 when Canada signed two really important agreements,
Okay.
NAFTA and the WTO's TRIPS agreement.
Okay, now help me understand this. How did these agreements, which were often presented as, free trade wins,
Yeah.
how did they actually harm Canada's economic future?
Well, on the surface, they seem like a good deal.
Right.
But what Balsillie argues is that they fundamentally shifted the focus
Okay.
from, producing physical goods to owning and controlling these intangible assets,
Right.
like software and data.
Okay.
And he says Canada just fundamentally failed to grasp the significance of that.
So while other countries were racing to kind of secure their position in this new landscape, we
Yeah.
were kind of stuck playing by the old rules.
Exactly. And he points to countries like, the U.S., China,
Yeah.
Scandinavian countries. They were all prioritizing the ownership and control of these intangible assets,
Right.
recognizing that that's where the real power and wealth was going to reside in the future.
All right.
So he says Canada really missed the boat on that.
So how did that play out in practical terms? Like, what are some concrete examples of opportunities that we missed?
He points to a number of different instances where he says, we essentially gave away our potential.
Oh.
So, for example, he talks about, Canada was at the forefront of funding fundamental research in artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
But a lot of that research ended up benefiting companies like Google.
Right.
They swooped in and capitalized on the groundwork that we had laid.
Yeah, it's almost like we funded the construction of a house and then let someone else move in and claim ownership.
That's a great analogy. And he says this happened repeatedly.
Wow.
We transferred taxpayer-funded battery technology to Tesla
Yeah.
with very little economic benefit flowing back to Canada.
Right.
We lost out on potential gains from, groundbreaking telecommunications technology that was essentially handed over to Huawei.
Wow. So we were investing in innovation but not reaping the rewards.
Exactly. And he highlights this really jarring contrast. He says Canada is first world in terms of research input.
Right.
We're generating knowledge. We're generating innovation.
Yeah.
But we're third world in terms of economic outcomes.
Mm.
We're not translating that innovation into tangible benefits
Right.
for Canadians.
That's pretty damning assessment.
It is.
But, if these agreements were signed back in 1994, why are we just feeling the full impact of this now?
Well, he argues it took time for the implications to fully manifest.
Okay.
The internet was still in its early stages back then.
Right.
The true value of data and intellectual property wasn't fully understood.
Mm.
But as the digital economy exploded,
Right.
the consequences of Canada's inaction
Yeah.
became impossible to ignore.
So we essentially signed away our future without realizing it.
That's essentially his argument, and he calls it Canada's original sin,
Oh, wow.
failing to grasp the magnitude of the shift that was underway
Right.
and the need to kind of secure our position in this new economic order.
So we were left playing catch-up in a game that had fundamentally changed.
Yeah.
But how did we become so vulnerable in the first place? Like, what allowed this to happen?
Well, this is where this concept of regulatory remote control comes in.
Okay.
And you see these agreements, while they were often touted as free trade deals,
Right.
actually gave significant control
Okay.
over Canada's economy to those who owned the dominant intangible assets. So the big tech companies, the data giants.
So that sounds a bit counterintuitive. Like, how does a free trade agreement hand over control to a handful of companies?
It's subtle, but it's incredibly powerful.
Okay.
So take the example of software.
Okay.
A company like Microsoft develops software, they patent it,
Right.
and then they effectively control its use and distribution globally
Right.
through licensing agreements and intellectual property rights.
So even though we're using the software, we don't actually own or control it. We're essentially renting it from them.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that applies to a vast array of technologies and digital platforms that underpin our modern economy.
Yeah.
So we've become dependent on these technologies,
Right.
but we don't own the underlying intellectual property.
Right. So what we're seeing now, this decline in our economic performance,
Yeah.
is a direct result of this lack of ownership and control.
That's a big part of it, according to Balsillie.
Okay.
We've become tenants in our own economy,
Wow.
paying rent to those who own the valuable intangible assets.
Mm.
And those landlords are calling the shots.
This is some pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? What does Balsillie propose we do about this?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
He argues that Canada is now at a crossroads, and the choices we make will determine our economic future.
Okay, so we're going to need to unpack that for sure.
We are.
But for now, let's take a quick pause and let our listener kind of absorb all this information.
Yeah.
It's a lot to digest, but understanding how we got here is crucial for figuring out where we go next. So we'll be back in a moment to dive deeper into Balsillie's proposed solutions and what they could mean for Canada's future.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, so we've established that, Canada's economic woes are deeply rooted in our failure to adapt to this rise of the intangibles economy.
Right.
But where do we go from here? Does Balsillie offer any solutions, any way for Canada to kind of regain its footing?
He does, and it starts with understanding a really critical distinction.
Okay.
The difference between comparative advantage and absolute advantage.
All right, break that down for me.
Okay.
I vaguely remember those terms from economics class, but
Yeah.
a refresher would be helpful.
Sure. So comparative advantage is this idea that, even if one country is better at producing everything,
All right.
it's still beneficial for both countries to trade.
Right.
They each specialize in what they're relatively better at making.
Okay.
So it's like a really efficient division of labor
Right.
on a global scale.
Okay, that rings a bell. So, for example, if one country's great at producing cars and another excels at making electronics, they can each focus on those strengths
Right.
and trade with each other.
Exactly. And that's the principle that underpin a lot of traditional trade agreements.
Yeah.
And it worked well in a production-based economy.
Right.
But in this new intangibles economy,
Yeah.
things operate differently.
Okay.
Here, absolute advantage reigns supreme.
So what does absolute advantage mean in this context?
It means that the goal is to be the outright owner and controller of the valuable intellectual property, the data, the algorithms.
Okay.
It's not about being relatively better. It's about being the best, period.
Oh, wow. So it's less about cooperation and more about straight up competition.
Precisely.
Okay.
And this is where Canada has faltered.
Right.
We've clung to this kind of outdated notion of comparative advantage,
Yeah.
while other countries have been aggressively pursuing absolute advantage
I
in the intangibles economy. So they're playing a different game and they're winning.
And Balsillie argues that this shift towards absolute advantage explains why we've seen this rise of these massive tech companies
Yeah,
that seem to have a stranglehold on so much of the digital world.
exactly. They've strategically acquired and consolidated intellectual property and data,
Right.
which gives them immense power and influence.
Yeah.
It's a winner-take-most dynamic, and Canada, with its outdated mindset, has been left on the
And
sidelines.
he uses this analogy
Yeah.
of, someone wanting to be the landlord and someone having to be the tenant.
Right.
And we've become content with being tenants in our own economy.
Yeah, it's a powerful image.
Yeah.
And it really highlights the urgency of the situation.
Yeah.
We're paying rent
Hmm.
in the form of, licensing fees, royalties, lost economic opportunities
Right.
to those who own and control these crucial intangible assets.
So how do we flip the script? How do we become landlords in this new economy?
Well, Balsillie outlines a few key steps. First, we need to get serious about developing our own intellectual property
Okay.
and data strategies.
Oh.
So that means investing heavily in research and development,
Yeah.
but also, and this is crucial,
Okay.
creating policies that encourage Canadian companies to own and control the fruits of their innovation.
So it's not just about funding research, it's about ensuring that the benefits of that research stay in Canada.
Exactly. We need to create an environment where
Yeah.
Canadian companies are incentivized to develop, own, and commercialize their intellectual property,
Yeah.
rather than just selling it off to foreign entities.
That makes sense. We need to build a strong foundation for our own economic house, so to speak.
Right.
What else?
He also stresses the importance of being much smarter about negotiating trade agreements.
Okay.
He says we need to move beyond this kind of simplistic free trade rhetoric and start focusing on deals that genuinely benefit Canada in the long run,
Yeah.
particularly when it comes to data and intellectual property rights.
So we need to be more assertive at the negotiating table, not just accept whatever terms are offered.
Absolutely. We need to learn from our past mistakes
Right.
and ensure that future agreements don't inadvertently hand over control of our data and our intellectual property to foreign entities.
It sounds like we need a complete overhaul of our approach to trade.
Yeah.
But is that enough?
Balsillie argues there's another critical piece to the puzzle.
Okay.
We need to rebuild Canada's capacity for economic thinking.
Oh, wow.
And he points out that we dismantled our economic council
Right.
over 30 years ago,
Yeah.
essentially gutting our ability to analyze and strategize on complex economic issues.
Yeah, that's a bit like trying to navigate a complex maze without a map.
Exactly.
Like, how can we make sound decisions without a deep understanding of the forces at play?
Exactly. We need to bring together experts from various fields, technology, law, economics, business,
Yeah.
to provide our political leaders with the knowledge and the insights. They need to navigate this new economic landscape that we can't afford to rely on outdated thinking
Yeah.
or simplistic solutions.
It sounds like we need to foster a much more nuanced and sophisticated understanding of the economy if we want to succeed in this new world.
Precisely. And that means moving beyond, ideological debates
Yep.
and embracing a more pragmatic and data-driven approach to policymaking.
So it's not just about changing policies, it's about changing our mindset.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
We need to cultivate a culture of economic literacy
Yeah.
and strategic thinking. Canadians need to understand the new rules of the game
Right.
and demand that our leaders act accordingly.
That's a powerful message. It's not just up to the politicians, it's up to all of us to push for change.
Exactly. The future of our economy depends on it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, speaking of the future,
Okay.
Balsillie delves into a topic that's becoming increasingly important in shaping the global landscape,
Yeah.
the rise of artificial intelligence.
AI is everywhere these days. It feels like it's transforming every aspect of our lives. But how does this tie back to Canada's economic situation?
Well, Balsillie argues that AI is both a tremendous opportunity and a potential threat.
Okay.
It has the potential to, revolutionize industries ranging from healthcare to finance to manufacturing.
Right.
And he argues that the countries that own and control this technology will wield immense power and influence.
So the stakes are incredibly high.
They are, and Balsillie is adamant that Canada needs to be proactive, not reactive,
Okay.
when it comes to AI.
Right.
We can't afford to sit on the sidelines and let other countries dictate the terms. We need to invest heavily in AI research and development, but also focus on creating a regulatory environment that fosters innovation while protecting our values and our interests.
So it's about finding that balance between fostering innovation
Yes,
and ensuring responsible development.
precisely. And that's no easy task.
Right.
But as Balsillie points out, the alternative is to become increasingly dependent on foreign AI technologies,
Yeah.
which could have, serious implications for our economic sovereignty
Right.
and even our national security.
It sounds like a classic case of adapt or be left behind.
It is.
And this time, the consequences of falling behind could be even more severe.
Exactly. The decisions we make now will have far-reaching consequences
Yeah.
for generations to come.
Okay, so we've got this overarching challenge of adapting to the intangibles economy.
Right.
And we've got this specific technological revolution happening with AI.
Yeah.
How does all of this play out in the Canadian political landscape?
That's a great question, and it brings us to two individuals
Okay.
who are vying to lead Canada into this new era.
Okay.
Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre.
Okay.
And Balsillie has been analyzing their approaches.
Okay.
And his insights are pretty revealing,
All right.
especially when it comes to, their understanding of this new economic reality.
All right, so let's start with Carney. He's been making headlines with his focus on transitioning to a green economy.
Yeah.
What's Balsillie's take on his approach?
Well, transitioning to a more sustainable economy is undoubtedly important.
Yeah.
Balsillie raises some concerns about whether Carney's approach is actually aligned with the realities of the intangibles economy.
You mentioned earlier that Carney's book Values barely touches on intellectual property or data.
Right.
That seems like a pretty glaring omission given their central role in the modern economy.
It is, and it raises questions about whether Carney fully grasps the dynamics of this new game. He seems to be operating with, an outdated mindset that prioritizes traditional industries
Right.
and government intervention rather than focusing on the forces that are truly driving innovation
Right.
in the 21st century.
And you also pointed out that his plan to tax Canada's hydrocarbon sector heavily,
Yeah.
while subsidizing sectors where we currently lag, could actually exacerbate our economic problems.
It's a risky strategy.
Yeah.
And it's not clear that it's based on a solid understanding of how value is created in this new economy. By neglecting the importance of intangible assets, he might be undermining the very sectors that hold the most potential
Right.
for future growth.
So Balsillie isn't convinced that Carney's approach is the right one for Canada.
He has some serious reservations.
Okay.
He argues that Carney's focus on the green economy,
Right.
while laudable, might distract from the more fundamental challenge of adapting to the intangibles economy and securing Canada's position in this new world order.
Okay, so what about Poilievre? Does Balsillie see him as a more viable option?
Well, there are certainly some encouraging signs.
Okay.
As we discussed earlier, Poilievre seems to recognize the need
Yeah.
for a two-pronged economic strategy,
Right.
one that addresses both the traditional economy
Yeah.
and this new intangibles economy.
Okay.
He's not clinging to outdated models.
So he's at least acknowledging the need to kind of catch up in that second leg of the race.
Yes, and that's a positive step.
Okay.
He's also been talking about the importance of economic sovereignty and the need for Canada to be more assertive
Okay.
in protecting its interests on the global stage.
So a bit more of a Canada-first approach?
Yes, but not in a protectionist sense.
Okay.
It's more about recognizing that Canada needs to be a strong and independent player in the global economy,
Right.
not just a passive follower.
Yeah.
He seems to understand that we need to be strategic about our place in the world and not shy away from competition.
That's a pretty significant shift from the rhetoric we've heard from Canadian leaders in recent decades.
It is.
Yeah.
And it suggests that Poilievre might be more attuned to the realities of this new economic landscape.
Okay.
He's surrounding himself with advisors who understand the importance of data, intellectual property, strategic economic thinking.
That's encouraging, but actions speak louder than words.
You do.
It remains to be seen whether Poilievre will actually follow through on his promises
Right.
and implement policies that genuinely position Canada for success in this new economy.
That's the key question, and it's one that we'll be watching closely. But at least he seems to be asking the right questions
Yeah.
and assembling a team that understands the challenges ahead.
So we've got Carney with his focus on the green economy.
Right.
And we've got Poilievre with his emphasis on economic sovereignty and strategic thinking.
Yeah.
It sounds like Canadians have a stark choice ahead of them.
They do.
Yeah.
And that choice will have a profound impact on our economic future.
Mm.
But regardless of who wins the next election,
Yeah.
Balsillie argues that there are certain fundamental shifts
Okay.
that Canada needs to make as a nation
Okay.
if we want to thrive in this new world.
Well, let's dive into those shifts. What does Balsillie see as the path forward for Canada?
That's exactly what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll look at specific strategies Canada can employ to leverage its strengths
Right.
and become a leader in the intangibles economy.
Okay.
And we'll examine some of the broader societal implications of this economic transformation.
Sounds good. Stay with us. Okay. So we've spent a good chunk of time unpacking Canada's economic challenges and the forces that have shaped our current predicament. But let's shift gears now and talk about solutions. What concrete steps can Canada take to really become a leader in this new economic landscape?
Yeah, so it's not about, becoming Silicon Valley North overnight. Balsillie argues that, Canada needs to play to its strengths.
Right.
We have, a highly educated workforce, world-class research institutions, a stable political system. These are all valuable assets in the knowledge-based economy.
That's true. We often hear about those strengths, but, they haven't really translated into economic success in recent years.
And that's because we haven't been strategic about leveraging them.
Yeah.
Balsillie argues that, we need to move beyond simply relying on our traditional strengths and start thinking about how we can apply them to the industries of the future.
So how do we do that? What are some specific areas where Canada could excel?
Well, Balsillie believes that Canada has a unique opportunity to become a leader in what he calls responsible innovation.
Okay.
So this means developing and deploying technologies like AI and data analytics in a way that benefits society as a whole, not just a select few.
I like that idea. It's about ensuring that technological progress goes hand in hand with social progress. But how do we actually put that into practice?
It starts by recognizing that Canada has a strong reputation for fairness, ethical conduct,
Mm.
social responsibility.
Right.
And these values are becoming increasingly important in the tech world,
Yeah.
especially as concerns grow about data privacy, algorithmic bias, and the potential misuse of AI.
So we can kind of differentiate ourselves by being the good guys of the tech world.
In a way, yes, we can position ourselves as leaders in developing ethical frameworks for AI and data governance, ensuring that these technologies are used to uplift humanity, not exploit it.
That's a compelling vision, but it sounds like a pretty ambitious undertaking.
It is, but it's also an opportunity to carve out a unique space for Canada on the global stage.
Right.
We could become the go-to nation for ethical and responsible technology development. That's a brand that carries a lot of weight in today's world.
Absolutely. Consumers are becoming much more discerning, about the companies and the countries they support. They want to align themselves with entities that share their values.
Exactly. So by embedding ethical considerations into our approach to technology, we can attract investment talent consumers who are looking for a more humane and responsible approach to innovation.
Okay, so responsible innovation is one broad area where Canada could make its mark. What about specific sectors? Where do we have the most potential to excel?
Well, Balsillie sees a lot of potential in Canada's natural resources sector, but not in the traditional sense.
Okay.
He argues that we need to move beyond simply extracting and exporting raw materials and start focusing on adding value through technology and innovation.
So instead of just, shipping out raw oil or lumber, we
Yeah.
could be using cutting-edge technologies to process and refine those resources here in Canada.
Precisely imagine using, smart sensors, AI-powered platforms to optimize mining operations, manage forestry resources, sustainably develop advanced manufacturing techniques to create high-value products from our natural resources.
Right. That would create jobs, boost our economy, make us more competitive in the global marketplace.
Exactly. It's about transforming our natural resources sector into a high-tech, knowledge-based industry.
That's a really interesting idea. What other sectors does he highlight?
He's also very bullish on clean technology.
Yeah.
Canada has abundant renewable energy resources, a strong track record in environmental science, and a growing cluster of clean tech companies.
So we could be at the forefront of developing and exporting the technologies that the world needs to transition to a more sustainable future.
Exactly. The global demand for clean technologies is only going to grow in the coming years, and Canada is well positioned to capitalize on that demand.
But we've heard this talk about clean tech before. What makes this time different? How do we ensure that we don't just fall into the same traps of the past?
Well, Balsillie emphasizes the need for a strategic and focused approach.
Okay.
We can't just throw money at random clean tech projects and hope for the best. We need to identify areas where Canada has a genuine competitive advantage
Right.
and then develop a clear roadmap for commercializing those technologies and scaling them up to compete globally.
So it's about being smart and strategic with our investments.
Absolutely. And it's about fostering close collaboration between government, industry, and research institutions.
Yeah.
We need to create an ecosystem that supports innovation and helps Canadian companies bring their clean tech solutions to the world.
It sounds like we need a fundamental shift in our thinking. No more clinging to outdated models or hoping that things will magically work out on their own.
Precisely, we need to embrace a bolder and more ambitious vision for Canada's economic future. We have the talent, the resources, the potential to be a global leader in the 21st century, but it's going to require a collective effort and a willingness to embrace change.
This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. Balsilie's perspective is both challenging and inspiring. He doesn't shy away from the hard truths about Canada's economic vulnerabilities, but he also offers a path forward, a way for us to become architects of our own destiny.
It's a call to action for all of us. Citizens, business leaders, policymakers, we all have a role to play in shaping Canada's economic future.
So, to our listener, what does this all mean for you? It means getting informed, engaging in these critical conversations, and demanding that our leaders make the bold decisions needed to secure a brighter future for Canada. It's time to embrace our potential and build an economy that works for everyone. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.